Just waiting for it. Hey, and we're here. Right, so recap. So how do sociologists conduct research? So I've prepared this little infographic for you, and step by step, we're going to go through it. Hey, look at that. So initially, sociologists will start with a pilot study. So they have a hypothesis. And rather than conduct a huge amount of research, they'll essentially do like a real miniature study to kind of justify what ideas they have about a study. So for instance, you might want to do a study into level of education of people in prison. All right, and you might want to take a sample of people in prison, okay, whether they be men or women, okay, and you might just do this with 10, 15 people to begin with, okay, and then you would extract the data from that and then base a hypothesis on this before doing a wider study, all right? And usually, when we look into prison studies, we find that education levels are quite low, all right? Moving on, then you'd collect, analyze, and evaluate that little bit of data that you've got, okay, to make the justifications about your pilot study and through your sample. Moving on, what you do next is some social surveys. Miss, would you like to give an example of a social survey?
So that can be a questionnaire, it could be an interview, or it could actually be an observation.
All right, and the observations can be covert. That's when the people who are being observed do not know they're being observed. Or they can be overt, okay, which is when they know they're being observed, but then you have the observer effect, okay? Right, now, again, all right, yeah, so look, these are examples of social surveys. Interviews, which are examples of qualitative data, because primarily, when I say data, it's written or spoken. Or alternatively, you can also have longitudinal studies. So this is almost like a biographical study of someone's life for sociological purposes. And as Miss mentioned earlier, there is a very popular series, and it's called 7 Up. And what 7 Up has done is followed people through their lives every 7 years and comes back to them. Okay, so it's a fascinating TV show, and we think it's at 63 now, don't we? Or something.
Highest I've seen 63.
63. Okay, so they go back every 7 years. Okay, and they study these people, and then they become famous again for a little bit, and then you forget about them, and then another 7 years it rolls around. So that's a really fascinating example of that. Okay, right. Obviously, you have observations, and again, as I mentioned before, they can be covert or overt. You have official statistics. Now, this is obviously an example of quantitative data. Quantitative data is just primarily numerical, okay? And it's usually a bit more black and white. It's usually a bit more binary. So, for instance, a positivist would really like this data, whilst an interpretivist, okay, would prefer interviews, okay? And that you would then have to weigh up the ethical issues of your research. So, for example, when we watched Donald McIntyre, he did a covert operation. Now, there's ethical issues with that because he was dishonest, wasn't he? He lied to people about why he was there and observing them. He lied to many people. You could see that as unethical. Or you could see what he did was important because it removed the observer effect and it was more authentic what he found, okay? Also, he was looking into racist criminals, so not many people really felt sympathetic towards them. But a covert study certainly does raise ethical issues. And finally, a focus on skills. Miss, would you like to enlighten what kind of skills they could be?
So we're looking at, if you're doing covert observation, you'll be looking at skills such as your personality, fitting in, changing how you conduct yourself. Other skills could include your research in itself, such as your pilot study, how you would carry out your pilot study, how you would analyze your data. So you need to know these kind of skills. So you need to know your quantitative skills and your qualitative skills. Okay.
All right. And on that note, we're going to end there. Thank you. And that'll be on the sociology channel very soon. Ta-da. And stop. Yeah, we got one.